All right, in this video, I'm going to teach you how to download a list of files using Python. Now, this is not the most complicated topic in the world, and the video was supposed to be super short, but as I kind of dug into all the different pros and cons of different methods, the video just got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And so I have a feeling this is going to be much longer than some of you would care to learn about downloading lists of files with Python. So what I'm going to do is just give you the answers right out of the gate. And then if you have deadlines or anything like that, no sweat, just copy and paste, go on with your life. But if you'd like to learn a little bit more about file handling and progress bars and subfolders and how URLs are made and even how to do this without Python, stick around for the full video. All right, the content that we're working with here, it's just a list. It's like a text file that every single line has a different URL to a PDF on it. I'm also going to show you how to do it with a CSV file because things are a little bit different if you're using CSVs. The data we're working with are school board minutes. So, there's meetings about school stuff and then they save a PDF of everything they talk about. Why this? I don't know. They always release it as PDFs though. So I figured I would find some sort of list and it's the most boring thing possible. Now, we are going to be working with files here. So CSV files, text files, but if your data is just a normal list, that's absolutely fine. You're going to, do the exact same thing that we do, just not reading in files. So let's get to the answers. Here is the first way. This is, I think, the best way of downloading all of these files. So I'm going to shift enter on here, and it's going to have this beautiful progress bar. It's going to print out all the files that it's downloading, and then it's going to put them into a folder that is called downloaded. And there they are. They all made it. Everything's great. The other way of doing it is fewer lines of code, and they're probably honestly easier lines of code to read. They basically do the same thing. They don't have a progress bar. They save the actual files in the same place as your Python script. So I know I got a lot of PDFs here kind of cluttering up my space, but whatever, it's fine. It's all okay. It's just two different ways to do it. If you watch the rest of the video, or even the first, 5 minutes of the video, you'll learn why this way is bad and this way is good. But, just cut and paste to your heart's content if you have something else to do. So let me clear out these files. I don't need either of these. And let's get started. Before we can really do anything, I want to talk about downloading files one at a time. And there are two different ways that we can download files one at a time. urllib is the first way to do it, and requests is the second way to do it. Now, urllib is kind of an old-fashioned way of interacting with the web that's built into Python. Requests is a little bit more modern, a little bit more usable, but a big difference between them is urllib makes it so easy to download files. So the first thing I'm going to do is I am going to import urllib. So I'm going to say, hey, urllib, I'm interested in request, which is the way that you request things. And then I can just say, hey, I have a URL, and let's just start with this URL here. And then I have, let's say, a file name, and I'm going to call this output.pdf, for example. And I'm going to say, hey, urllib, please go download this file. Here's the URL. Here's the file name that I want it to be. Shift enter, and it says, great, something happened. If I go into Finder, I can see I have an output.pdf here. I double click it. It opens real big, and there we go. We got a PDF. Everything's great. Everything's perfect. Except it's only going to work in this one situation. So these two file names right here are exactly the same. They're exactly the same file name, exactly the same URL, except one of them is more kind of internet-y than the other one. Technically speaking, URLs cannot have spaces in them. So what happens is if you try to make a request to something that has spaces in it, it replaces all of those spaces with %20, because why not? And then other special characters like parentheses. Instead of parentheses, you have %28. Instead of this parenthesis, you have %29. So it seems like, everything should be fine, but check this out. If we say, hey, let's try using the easier to read URL with urllib. I say, hey, same thing, go get this URL, save it as the file name, output.pdf. Shift enter, it freaks out. Invalid URL, invalid URL, invalid URL. It says, I have no idea what to do with this space. URL cannot contain control characters. It's like, I have no idea what you're talking about. So if you want to use urllib, even though this is very, very easy to download URLs that don't have any special characters in them, or special characters that have already been converted to this fun, it's called a URL encoding, to the fun URL encoded version, I would say it's kind of a bummer that just automatically it's not going to allow us to put spaces in the URLs. There are ways around this. We can manually URL encode it. We can say, change all of these spaces to be %20s, things like that. But honestly, let's not. There's a better way. There's a more futuristic way. There's a way where if we do it and our boss is all up on, the modern Python world, they won't, criticize us for using something kind of old school like urllib. Even though, like I said, this is very easy to look at, very easy to understand. Retrieve this URL, save it as that file name. Life is perfect. Now, the alternative here is going to be using the requests library. Now, you might need to pip install requests. If you're in a Jupyter notebook, !pip install requests will do it. If you're on the command line, you can just pip install requests. Either of those will work. I already have it installed, so I'm not going to pip install it. And you're just going to say import requests. Nothing crazy there. So let's use requests in order to grab this URL here. So I'm going to copy this here just so it's all in one cell. And I'll say, hey, go get this URL. And you always save it in something called response. Done. This doesn't create a file though. All this does is say, hey, I have, the content of this URL and it's hanging out inside of this variable. Please save it to a file. Problem with requests is, unlike urllib, it will not let you automatically save something. There's no like requests.save in order to take this URL and then save it to this file. So we need to pull in some other library. There are a few different ways we can do it, but to kind of be as futuristic as possible, we are going to use pathlib. Pathlib is a library that's built into Python, and it's a really good way of reading and writing files. It's not necessarily the most popular way of doing it, but it is the best. So what we want to do, if we have pathlib, we import path from it, and then we can say, hey, go grab this file name. Go grab this file name, and then write some stuff to it. Done. Technically, when you want to write content to a file using pathlib, there's two ways to do it. One of them is .write text, and the other one is .write bytes. You will use write text if you are downloading text files, if you're downloading HTML files, if you're downloading anything that's just text. On the other hand, we are downloading PDFs, which aren't text, they're more like images, things like that. So we're going to be using write bytes instead. And so we say, hey, path, I'm interested in this file called output.pdf. I would like for you to write a bunch of content to it. What's the content? Oh, it's the stuff from whenever we grabbed the URL. And then, same thing as before, we have this output.pdf file. And I mean, it looks the same. I could be tricking you and this couldn't work at all. And maybe it's still the urllib version. But just know I'm not lying to you. So this version is a little bit more complicated. It does take more lines. It does take 2 libraries instead of 1. But let's copy and paste this. I'll get rid of this comment. The magic is if we change the URL to be the one that has spaces in it, and then we shift enter, it will not give us an error. Requests understands how to deal with URLs that have spaces in them. So we love requests, urllib, we wish we could love you, but you're just not flexible enough. All right. Next up, if we want to read in a bunch of these different PDFs and save them to files, we cannot call all of them output.pdf. Probably we want to save this one as 10.06.21 combined meeting minutes 1.pdf, so it has the same file name here as the file name that it has when it is living on the web server. So our computer's file name will be the same as the file name out on the internet, instead of all of them being output.pdf. There's two different ways to do this. One of them you'll see a lot using os.path, and it goes like this. If we have a URL, the URL looks like this. We just want to extract this part right here. This part right here is called the base name, or the name of the file. Obviously, it's the name of the file. And we can say, hey, grab the base name from that URL, and then ta-da, we have the file name. So I can say file name equals this, and now if I want to save the file, all I need to do is say, hey, we already have the file. Just save it. Just save it using the file name that we pulled out of the URL. Perfect. Great. Now, doing another import seems kind of trashy to me. Like I said, I already am having a heart attack because I'm importing both requests and pathlib. So what we can do is actually use pathlib instead of os.path. One thing that might be kind of confusing, by the way, is we imported path from os, and then that is a lowercase p path. And then when we imported pathlib, we imported capital P path, and those are actually two completely different things. So if I use capital P path, know that I'm talking about pathlib, and if I use lowercase p path, I'm talking about the one from the OS library. Confusing? Yes, but that's just how it is. So the other way to do this, the other way to get the base name, is I can say, hey pathlib, go grab that URL. It's not going to download the URL or anything. It's just going to kind of look at the URL. And it says, yeah, here I am. What do you want me to do? And I'm going to say, from that URL, just give me the name. So path URL.name will just pull out the name part of it, or the base name part of it, whatever you want to call it. And then I can save that as file name, and then say, I'm going to save to file name. So if we want to do our downloading, I'll say, hey, I'll put this in a different cell. I'll say, okay, here's my URL. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say, hey, path, pull out the actual name. Pull out the file name we want to save it as. And then I say, hey, requests, go get the file. And then I say, hey, both of you, work together to save it to the file name. So I say path, open up that file name, which will just be 10.06.21 combined meeting minutes 1. And then I say write bytes response.content. I run it, it prints out how many bytes it wrote, which is not very helpful at all. But if I go back to Finder, I can see, there we go, it saved the file. The file looks great, living in the same folder as my Python script, but that's fine. It's not a big deal. All right, now we have successfully taken a URL. We have pulled out the file name, we've grabbed the URL, and then we've saved the file to our computer with the same file name. Now we want to do it with a list of files. I have two lists of files here. One of them is files.txt. One of them is files alt.txt. This one is URL encoded just so I could run the script earlier on with urllib, because urllib doesn't like spaces, but I personally like files.txt the best. Now, things to note about this file: it's not a CSV, doesn't have a header up top or anything, doesn't have multiple columns. It's just a file where every single line is a file name. The issue is, if you start to figure out how to read in these files, usually the way that you read in a single file is you say, hey, open up this file. What did I call this? Files.txt. And then read the lines out of it. And it's great. And look at this. It's the first line, the second line, the third line, the fourth line, the fifth line. And they are all in a list and it's all perfect and everything's great. Except it's not actually great. If you say, hey, Python, open this file, read the lines in it, it sadly includes this \n. Technically, it's a new line character at the end of every line, because it says, yes, I understand that this is the first line and this is the second line and the third line, but I really just want to include this thing that means, yeah, someone hit enter at the end of this line. I don't know why it happens like that. It makes me sad, but that's just how it is, I guess. So what we're going to do instead of using read lines, because it's going to screw it up when we're trying to pull out the file name at the end, we're going to say, hey, we just want to read this file, and then it's all mashed together, and then we want to split lines. And so magically, this is good, and it gets rid of that \n, whereas if I try to do read lines, it's sad and bad. Bad and includes \n, whereas this is better and just includes the full URLs. Great, right? I'm going to save this as file names, because why not? And now I have a list of file names. What I want to do now is loop through this list of file names and download each of them. Luckily, I'm just going to be able to save, or I'm just going to be able to pull this code and use it same as I did before. So let me actually call this URLs, because they're not file names, they are URLs. All right, let's do this. For URL in URLs, I'm going to start by just printing it out so that I know I'm looping through the right thing. This looks fine to me. And then what am I going to do? I'm going to say, oh, hey, let's pull out the file name that we want to save it as. So I'm going to say file name equals path.name. I print, I want to save this as file name. This gets a little bit dirty, so I'm going to do my favorite trick, which is just print a lot of lines up at the top of here. Okay, here's my URL, and I want to save it as that. Sure, that makes sense. Next step is I'm going to tell request to go get the file. So I'm going to say response equals request.get URL. And then I want path, lib, and request to work together to save it as that file name. So I'm going to say, hey, path, or hey, path lib, save it as this file name. I want you to write the bytes that are hiding inside of that response.content. I run this. It works, it works, it works, it works, it works. I look in Finder, and there we go. All of these beautiful, beautiful files here. You know, I think these should probably be in another folder. When do I teach us how to do that? We'll just, we do that down here. Okay. Now, if you have a lot of different files, if you are living a life where you're downloading 1,000 files or 100,000 files or something like that, printing out things like this is probably not your favorite idea in the world, because it's going to scroll and scroll and scroll and scroll and scroll and be very ugly and disgusting. So you might just delete it. Here, I'll put this down here. So you might just delete all these print statements, and you might say, I trust that one day it will finish, and show it. So I shift enter here, and I had to wait a while, right? I had to wait for it to run, and I'm not sure how long it's going to take. So do I have 10 files or 100 files or 1,000 files? Is the server slow? Is the server fast? When can I expect this to be done? And you don't really know. You don't really know. So the best thing to do is probably to add a progress bar. So there's a library called tqdm, and tqdm is the best library that exists for Python because anytime you have loops, it will just show you this beautiful little progress bar, and it just, I don't know, it's a dream. And it kind of allows you to see how long it's going to take for anything to finish and how far along you are so far. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to install pip install tqdm. If you're on the command line, you do not need the exclamation mark. I already have this installed, so I'm not going to install it. And in order to use it, all I need to do is say from tqdm.auto import tqdm. The reason why we're pulling it from auto is you can use tqdm in different places. You can use it on the command line. You can use it in a Jupyter notebook like we are. You can use it literally anywhere. And depending upon where you are, it operates a little bit differently. But if you pull it from tqdm auto instead of just tqdm, it will kind of adapt to wherever you're at automatically. So how do we add a progress bar? What kind of craziness do we need? All we have to do is say, instead of for URL in URLs, I just say for URL in tqdm URLs. Shift enter. It gives me a beautiful progress bar, and that was it. That was all I had to do in order to get a progress bar happening. I just had to install this library and then wrap what I'm looping through in tqdm. This works for literally any loop you're ever going to do. It's a dream. Please use it all the time. All right. Issue with what we've been doing is if I'm downloading 1,000 files, I'm going to end up with 1,000 files in the same place as my Jupyter notebook or my Python file or whatever I'm using. It's going to make me angry. I would much rather that these live inside of some other folder. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to be using pathlib to do that. I'm going to say, okay, where do I want my stuff to go? I want it to go in, let's say, a folder called downloads. Sure, why not? It's going to be inside of the current folder that I'm in. It's just going to put a new folder inside of here called downloads. And say, okay, download dir equals path downloads. Great. In order to save things into this folder, it needs to exist. I need to create it. So I'm going to say, hey, download dir, I would like for you to be created. And if I did like downloads, PDFs, secret PDFs, what I would need to do is say parents equals true, so that if I want secret PDFs created, maybe I also need these created too, and those are called parents. So I'll say, hey, please create it. And I go back to my Finder and I say, okay, I got downloads. Oh no. Oh, sorry, I needed to run this code again. I say, please run it, and it says downloads, PDFs, secret PDFs. It's made all of these folders. Everything's great. Everything's perfect. Until I try to run this line of code again. And then it yells at me. And it says, no, 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 no. You have already made this folder. You've already made downloads, PDFs, secret PDFs. We can't do it again. We can't do it again. So what you have to do is say, oh, no, no, no. If it already exists, it's okay. Don't worry about it. Don't yell at me if it already exists. Now, that is how you create the folder, but how do you use it? How do you use it? Well, if we have a file name that exists that look like this, and we want to say, hey, somehow attach this to this. So I want it to be downloads, PDFs, secret PDFs, and then what we got right here. The way to do that is, let's take our download directory and then add on the file name. And there we go. Yes, sure, it has this weird POSIX path thing around it. But if we have a folder that we want to put a file in, all we need to do is say .join path, and then it gives us the full complete file name of where we're trying to save stuff to. So let's add this to what we got so far. So far, we loop through these URLs, we pull out the file name, we get the response, and then we write it to this place right here. The things I will add is in this block, before I start to download anything, I'm going to say, okay, here's where I want to save my stuff. And please make that directory if it does not exist. And then instead of saying, hey, let's just grab this file name and then write the bytes to it, I'm going to instead say, go look in that download directory and then stick the file name onto the end of it and then write all that content in. Shift enter, chugs along, chugs along, chugs along, go back to Finder, and there we go. It's beautiful. Look at all those PDFs hiding inside that secret PDFs folder. It's a dream. I've never been happier. If all you wanted was basic methods of downloading files, just using plain text files, you're done. But if you want to learn how to do fun things like renaming them using CSV files, we're going to go a little bit deeper. We're going to start digging into pandas. So I have another file. Instead of just this plain files.txt, I also have file list.csv, which has a date and then it has a URL. So it's a little bit more complicated than what we had before. I'm going to read it in, import pandas as PD, df equals PD read CSV, file list.csv, df.head. Now, you might need to pip install pandas. If you want to work with CSVs, Panda is the best thing in the world. So go wild, do whatever you're going to do. All right. When you are going through pandas, when you want to do something for every single row, you do not use for loops. In the way that we used for loops up here, you don't really do that with pandas. Instead, you use something called apply. So df.apply is the version of saying, hey, I want to do something for every single one of my rows. Now, also you could loop through every single row at a time using something called iter rows, but people get really angry if you do that. But if you want to make people very angry, just look up iter rows and your life might be easier as a result. We're going to do this the cool, fun, real way, I guess. And that involves jumping through a lot of hoops. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to create a chunk of code that is going to get run for every single one of these rows. I'm going to call this chunk of code download file. Technically, this is called a function, but do you actually care? Maybe not. And what I'm going to do is for every single one of my rows, I'm just going to print it out. I'm going to print out what it looks like, and it'll be fine. So I'm going to say, hey, data frame, go through every single one of your rows and then download a file for it. Technically speaking, df.apply does things for every single column. So I have to add axis equals 1 so that it does it for every single row instead. Shift enter, prints out this first one, prints out this second one, prints out this third one, prints out this fourth one. That is the ugliest thing I've ever seen. I'm mostly just interested in the URL. Inside of download file, I can actually treat this just like a dictionary. So what column do I want? I want the URL column. So I'm going to say print row URL. Oh, much nicer, much nicer. Maybe I'll even save this as URL, and then I'll print downloading URL. Nice. Because we now have a URL, we can just copy all the code we used before, right? So before, we just said, hey, get the name from the path or from the URL, go grab the thing from the website and then save it here. So I'll do that same thing here. I'm going to save the download directory there. I am going to copy and paste this code here, and I'm just going to paste it right on in. So same code we did before, but now we're doing it in a pandas data frame. So I will call this secret PDFs from pandas just to make sure that it's saved somewhere else so we know that it works and everything's fine. Shift enter, downloading, 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 downloading. I check here, I have a new folder. It's called secret PDFs from pandas. And there we go, we got a bunch of secret PDFs. Now, problem with this is these are really ugly file names. We have the dates for each one of these. This date, this date, this date, this date, this date. But then here it's like there's underscores and they're not in a sortable order. And this has like 1 afterwards and they have different weird names. It's too much. It's too much for me. I just want this one here to be called something like 2021 0707, right? 2021 0728, 2021 0804, something like that. Now, the reason why I'm having us do this with pandas, with the CSV file, this is the only reason why we're doing this instead of a plain text file, is because I'm going to say, hey, let's use this date column and use it to create a file name. And there are a few different ways to do it. I'm going to do it in maybe the not optimal way, but instead of just grabbing the name from the URL, right? Instead of just grabbing this name right here, I'm going to say, hey, I want my file name to be the date column plus, let's say, like minutes.pdf. The other way to do this, if you like f strings, which I normally do, is to say fill in the blanks with row date and in a -minutes.pdf. So either of these ways will work fine, but it just means that we are creating a special file name based on the date column instead of just using the file name that exists in the world. So Shift Enter, downloading, 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 and then I look and there we go. We have a nice clean version of this that doesn't have, ones and capital letters and all kinds of stuff. They're in sortable order with year, month, date, and it's just so much nicer. Just so much nicer. Okay, one thing we missed though. We are very sad because we had a progress bar here. We do not have a progress bar here. And you say, Soma, I really want a progress bar. And I say, don't worry. Don't worry. Because tqdm is so nice and so good, all we need to do is change this to progress apply. And then, oh no, what did I do wrong? Did I spell it wrong? Am I bad at spelling? Oh no. Do I have to do, oh, okay. I got it. I got it. I'm going to leave this in here because why not? The one thing we have to add when we pull in tqdm, I told you that tqdm does things automatically, right? When we do from tqdm.auto import tqdm, I said it's automatically doing stuff for the command line, automatically doing stuff for your notebook, automatically doing everything. The one thing it doesn't do automatically is hook into pandas. So if we want a progress bar when we're doing our apply, we need to do tqdm.pandas, and then tqdm goes out and it says, oh, I want to do some panda stuff. It's going to be great. I'm going to hook into pandas. So now I can do df.progressApply, and I will get a nice, perfect progress bar here. Let's say we hate this version. Let's say you're so angry because you don't like CSV files, or you don't like pandas, or you don't like writing this function here, and you just want to take your CSV file, which looks like this, and you want to turn it into just this nice, gentle files.txt right here. How are you going to do that? Well, if we already have this file open as a data frame, what I can do is I can say, hey, I want to save this to a CSV, and I'm going to call it, let's say, filelist.txt. If I just run df2csv filelist.txt, the file that comes out of it looks like this, right? It's clearly a CSV file. It has date, it has URL, it has this weird column on the left-hand side that says 1, 2, 3, 4. That doesn't have a name. It's called the index. If you want to get rid of the index, which you always want to do, you add index equals false. We run it again. It's still a CSV that has 2 different columns, but we're getting better. We're getting better. We only want the URL column. We only want the URL column, right? We only want the URL. So I'm going to say, hey, what columns do we want to save? We just want to save the URL column, and it does have to be in a list. Save it, look at it, great. Just URLs now. But we don't like this first row, right? This first row, this header row is getting in the way of this being a nice, perfect, fine text file. So now I'm finally going to add header equals false. I add header equals false, and now everything is perfect. We can use one of the simpler ways of downloading this list of files. Now, there's actually a simpler way that is simpler than everything we've done here with all of this Python stuff, and that is using a tool called wget. Now, for some reason, there's two really big pieces of software that live on the command line that are for downloading things. One is called curl, and one is called wget. They're both good. They both do different things, or they both do a lot of the same things, but then they focus on different topics. Curl comes installed with OS X. wget does not come installed with OS X. For this one, we do need wget. So if you want to install wget, I recommend that you run off and install Homebrew. If you haven't installed Homebrew, I'm confused as to how you successfully install all this Python stuff without Homebrew, but it's fine. Just go download Homebrew and then download wget by saying brew install wget. If you are a Windows user, just Google how to install wget, and I'll drop a link into the description. You basically go to a web page, you download wget.exe, and then you drop it somewhere on your computer so the terminal can find it. So what you do if you have wget installed. So wget can be used to download one file at a time. So let's say I say wget, go out there and download this file. I'm going to use an exclamation mark. If you're on the command line, you don't use an exclamation mark, but putting an exclamation mark here just means run it like it's the command line. But I don't want to be on the command line right now, so I'm going to do this. So I say, hey, go download this file. And then it goes out and it downloads this file, and you look at it, and it says, yeah, downloaded that file. Nice, right? If you have a list of files, I can say, hey, wget, I have a list of files. Go download everything in files.txt. And then I run it, and it downloads this, and it downloads this, and it downloads this, and it downloads this, and it says, great, I'm done. And now I have this file, and 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 I say, no, I don't want them here. I want them in the downloads folder. I want them in the downloads folder, right? Downloads folder. So I say, hey, wget, go download that list of files and put them inside of the downloads folder. Shift enter, it runs, and then there we go. wget has downloaded all of these files into the downloads folder. It gave me progress on all of them. It has progress bars. Everything about wget is perfect. It's just something you have to install outside of Python. So if you want to do this like quickly and cleanly, and you don't have a problem with installing wget, use wget to do this. Your life will be much easier. If you want to live inside of a Jupyter notebook and you want to, have fun in this way, do that. That's fine too. If you'd rather live that Python life. So there you go. Just as a review, this is everything that we need in order to download a text file up here. We're using path. We're using tqdm. We're using requests. This right here will give you a progress bar. It will work if there are spaces in the file name. It will create a downloaded folder or a downloads folder that you can save all of this content into. The alternative way is the way that uses urllib. We found it doesn't work perfectly. It doesn't like things like spaces in URLs, but it downloads things. It's going to clutter up your directory here that you're running this code in. But sometimes you don't care. Sometimes you just want something that is 6 lines long, and then you're good, instead of something that is 10 lines long that does a lot more. So that's it. Go forth, use tqdm for everything in the world, and always be angry about read lines and split lines.